Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and I am exploring the world of Quilter's Creative Touch. These are all designs that I have stitched on my long arm, and they are all included with the Quilter's Creative Touch software. So all of these are pre-programmed, and the machine has stitched them for me. So let me show you how this is going to work. So I'm going to go into, this is the tablet that I've installed with the QCT software. I'm going to double click that to open it up. And then it always gives you this little warning here, and that's to make sure that your needle is up and you're in the center of your stitching area. So I'm going to say okay, and then you can hear it. It's going to move the machine a little bit. It kind of goes through a little reset. It moves it around, and that's just to make sure that everything is working. It also checks that the firmware is current, and then it gets started. So here we go. All right, so I'm going to click Select and Sew, and I should specify this is Quilter's Creative Touch 4, and this is the beginnings version of the software. It is cheaper, it is much more stripped down, so I can do less in it, but already I can find I have done amazing things with this so far. All right, so anytime you start the software, this is what it's going to ask you to do. It's going to ask you to select and tell it where the safe areas are. So I'm going to move the machine back here so that I'm in the batting area. I'm off the quilt just a little bit, and you can see I'm as far back against this back rail as I can go. And I'm going to click top left. Okay, so you just select these buttons here whenever you get the machine in the right position. Okay, so I've moved the machine into the bottom right area, a little bit into the batting, but not very far, and I'm going to click bottom right. All right, so now we're ready to select a design. And you can see right up here, I'm in the blocks. We also have continuous line designs that are designed to be chained together, like in borders or to create pantographs. And then also triangular shapes. And these are all included with the Quilter's Creative Touch beginning software. We also have border sets, where you have the design that will be continuous line down the length of your border, plus the corner, so that way you can turn the corner too. But today I just want to work on a block. So let's pick a cute one here, something fun. I've already done this feather wreath, and that was really cute. Let's try the more simple version of that. I'm going to select it and click open. So this is the next screen that's going to pop up, and I really think of this as my settings screen. And the reason is that's really what I start using whenever I get in here. So I first click on settings. This is going to be the most important screen that you work on, because this determines how big the design is, how it's going to be placed on your quilt, how fast it's going to stitch out, which also affects the quality, how many stitches per inch, which also affects the quality, the tie-off count, and how it ties off. So you have two different versions. You can do a micro stitch. You can also do a back and forth. I prefer the micro stitch, and I like to set that at 2. I like to stitch my designs slow. I just find that that looks better, and I crank it up to the highest stitches per inch, and that's 15. Of course, if you want to use less thread and have a simpler version of the design, then of course you can dial this down. Let's see how low it will go. I actually haven't tried. You can dial it down to 7 stitches per inch. Just understand, a more complex design, particularly if something's really, really curvy and you have big chunky stitches, that's going to come out looking kind of bad. So keep that in mind. All right, so this is the area that's really important for placing the design on your quilt. We have multiple different options here, but each placement method is going to determine how big the design is on your quilt and if it's going to fit nicely. So here's what I've determined. I like using 4 points, and let's say my block is maybe not exactly right. I like to set it to stretch. And so what that's going to do is that's going to perfectly orient that block into that space, that design, I should say. The quilting design will be perfectly oriented in that space and stretched ever so slightly to fit it really nicely. Now you've got some different options here. If you center it and you select 4 points, well then the design is going to stay small, and it's going to squish it within that, and it's going to be determined based on the center of those 4 points. And honestly, I don't think that it's actually going to resize. This makes it look like it will be resized, and it actually won't. So you could select 4 points and then end up with a gigantic design that you don't want it to be that big. Fit is going to maintain the aspect ratio of the design, meaning let's say the aspect ratio is 8 by 8 and you select fit. Well, it's going to shrink that and keep that 1-to-1 ratio, but it's not going to fill the block perfectly. So if the block is a little bit off, fit is not going to fit that perfectly into it. I really think stretch is a great choice, so that's what I'm going to use. Now over here, we've got some fun things that we can do. We can actually set the block so that it stitches a ditch, or we can do echo ditching. And you can see, you can do echo ditching all the way inside. You can do a 1-inch border. You could even make it even smaller than that. You could go inside and do a full 1 7/8 or 2 inches inside the square, which is, kind of crazy, but something definitely fun to play with. I like echo ditching, so I'm going to bring this out and do a 1/4 inch echo ditching. And you can see here I have selected ditch there, and then that I've shrunk it inside a 1/4 inch. So that's how I know that's going to work nicely. The pattern here, I want to shrink that down to a 1/2 inch. So that way the pattern's going to be a 1/2 inch inside the square that I set, and then my ditching is going to be a 1/4 inch inside the square I set. So there we go. That's all the settings I'm selecting for this one. And understand that this is going to be different for every kind of quilt that you make and everything that you do. It really just depends on the design that you're going for. Okay, so now it's time to get on the machine and start rolling it around. I'm going to take it up here, and you can see I have marked this square here with a magic marker. I'm actually doing some coloring here. I'm taking some Fabrico markers. These are my favorite fabric markers, and I am coloring in and making this a very colorful quilt. So this is a fun thing that you can do too. Whenever you're playing with your Creative Touch software, you can stitch in one color of thread and then add color with markers or paint after your quilt is done. All right, so I like that placement for my first corner, so I'm going to select there. All right, and this screen goes a little crazy and it looks really wonky, but just be patient with it. Once you get all of the corners set, then it really starts looking normal again. Okay, so that looks like a good placement right there for my next corner. And you can do this in any order. You don't have to select these always, going right to left or whatever. You can select them in any order you want. And you can always reselect them too. So if you ever realize, oh wait, I don't exactly like that placement, you can go in and you can fix it. Okay, so this has now resolved itself. You can see it looks normal again, but as you can see down here, placed height, placed width, this isn't a perfect square. It's ever so slightly off in the height versus the width. So I'm glad that I am stretching it. And it has a little bit of information here, so that way you understand a little bit about it. The pattern will be stretched to the block edges, but understand, go back to our settings, I have shrunk it to be within my, adding these margins to be a 1/2 inch smaller, and then my ditch a 1/4 inch smaller. So I'm gonna hit OK. All right, so we are actually ready to stitch. Really fun, here we go. What we're gonna first do is pull the bobbin. What this is gonna do, actually, there's a couple things that we really need to pay attention to here because this could throw you off a little bit. We have the pattern, we have the ditch. When you click this button, you can see it flips between the two. So I want to stitch that pattern first, so I make sure that's selected, and then now I'm going to pull the bobbin. Now I have mine set so that it does a full, it kind of shows you a lot more pictures here. And it always is going to pop up this warning that says, please ensure the needle is up. And this is good. I think this is a really good thing to leave it because you do not want the machine moving if the needle is down. It would be bad. Okay, so it drops the needle down, and then it's going to give you that warning again up here and say, please ensure the needle is up. Click OK. It's going to move a short distance away, and as you can see, if you hang onto that top thread and pull, that's your bobbin thread. So there we go. I've got both thread tails in my hand, and then you can move it back. You can do a single stitch. You can do all that kind of stuff. I'm ready to sew, so I'm going to click sew. Now one more time, it's going to say, please ensure the needle is up. I know that seems a little tedious, but you really want to leave those warnings up there just in case. All right, so now it's going to take those 2 micro stitches exactly like how I have it set. And that is just ensuring that the bobbin thread doesn't get sucked down into the bottom of the machine. And now it's going to stitch my feather wreath. Now I've learned that you really can't control where it stitches and how it stitches over your thread tails. I found that that's not a big deal. I will tie off and bury those thread tails once this finishes stitching. But you can see this is set to slow, and I like it set to slow because it really makes sure that all of the stitches come out nice. I'm very picky though. If you want it to stitch faster, particularly if you're doing pantos, you can always change that setting to medium or fast. Okay, it's coming up here on the end, and I just moved those thread tails a little bit to get it out of the way. And then it's going to slow down, and then it'll take those micro stitches again. The thing I want you to see is just exactly how I set it. I've got that 1/2 inch margin here. It looks really nice. It's centered nicely in the block. This would be the perfect design to stitch in any block. You could make it bigger, go over, a 12-inch block. It would end up very nice and soft. Okay, so here's what the screen does after the sewing is complete. I'm going to click Finished, back to Pattern Placement, and you'll be able to hear a little noise. That is the carriage disengaging. But I'm going to fully disengage it because this is something I've determined. I really like to pull up my bobbin thread, break it, so that way I can tie off and bury my thread tails. So I'm going to release the sewing machine. I've just found that trying to use the bobbin pull method at the end is really tricky. So I just release the sewing machine, I pull it over, I hang onto that top thread, I go needle down, needle up, and this is just a little faster to do it all on my own. Then I clip that loop, that's your bobbin thread. I go back over here to where I have that thread break, okay? I'm gonna pull back on that top thread and it's gonna pull up a loop. That's my bobbin thread, and I'm just gonna pick at it with the tip of my cheater needle, and that's gonna come up to the surface, and then I'll be able to tie off and bury both thread tails. And I do this in sets of 2. So here we go. I'm going to tie that into an overhand knot, just like so. And I tighten that down, it's a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch from the quilt surface. Then I run that cheater needle, or self-threading needle, through the quilt, making sure it doesn't come out the back, and then pull it through. And it's just a little bit tricky. I've got the ruler base here underneath, and I need to actually take that off because I really don't need to quilt with rulers while I'm quilting with software. So, I don't need that anymore. And there we go. That one's done. And then this one you saw, it just got stitched over just a little bit. I can just pick at that. That's fine. Do the exact same thing again. Tie it in an overhand knot, and then tighten it down. And I've got a much more detailed tutorial, much more of a close-up here and that is at leahday.com/hide threads. And you can find that video. That's going to guide you through. And then you can also find cheater needles on that page. So you can do this too. And this is what I do with all of my thread tails, all of my thread breaks. I like nice secured thread breaks. I did a little bit of a blip right there, but otherwise I'd say that is absolutely perfect. Okay, so now it's time to do the stitching in the ditch. So I'm going to click OK to have the software take control of the machine again. I'm going to go right here and click Ditch. And I'm going to click Pull Bobbin because I want that bobbin on the top. I don't want it being stitched to the back of the machine. Again, got some warnings to go through, and it's going to give me another warning here. Needle down, needle back up. I'm going to click OK. I'll pull on that, and that's my bobbin thread up on the surface, and then I click Sew. And you can see that square is just ever so slightly wonky there, and that's okay. Our quilts may not be perfect, and what's nice is that the software can work around that, and visually, because you're echo ditching, you're not going to be able to see that. It's not going to be super obvious. So here it goes. Really nice stitching right around that block, and you can see how nicely, of course I've got this wide marker line here that I've drawn, but still it is very nicely staying exactly where I wanted it to stay. I love that. Okay, now it's going to take the 3 micro stitches or 2 micro stitches again. There it goes. Okay, so yet again, I'm going to go through this ending. This is kind of my routine now. I'm going to click finished. You can hear it disengage. I'm going to go over here to the toolbox. There's lots of different things over here in the toolbox that's really useful, but I like release sewing machine. And again, that just releases it. It's going to give me all the functions back into the handlebars that I'm used to having. So I just needle up, needle down, pull up that bobbin thread. If I wanted to, I could go and start quilting designs and do ruler quilting or whatever I wanted to do right now. I've got, control over the machine again, but I just want to needle up, needle down, so that way I can take care of these thread tails. All right, so there we go. Okay, so I have one more little bonus I wanted to show you guys because this is really cool. What if you decided you wanted to stitch in the ditch and do your echo ditching too? Well, you can't program all of that in at once, so here's what you do. You go in and stitch your design and go in and stitch your echo ditching. That's the 1/4 inch or however far inside you want. Here I just did a 1/4 inch inside my square, but now I'm going to go back into my settings and I'm going to go back to the ditch and I'm going to expand this. So now it's going to stitch exactly on the edges. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to make sure I'm on the ditch. And remember, I already placed my pattern. I don't need to replace it. I can just go in and pull my bobbin and it's going to stitch this exactly around that design. And again, I've got these warnings. Please ensure the needle is up. And I had some skipping stitches issues the very first time I worked with the software. It was another problem entirely. I will share with you guys in another video. And let's just say it is very scary when you break a needle when you're using Quilter's Creative Touch. So you definitely don't want that. All right, I'm going to click sew. It doesn't take very much time, but it's just a good habit to get into, to always have that bobbin on the top. Okay, here we go. So now this is going to stitch out according to those 4 points that I set originally, and it's going to give me nice stitching exactly in the ditch. All right, there we go. So as you can see, I've got a lot of thread tails to tie up and bury, but I am super happy with how that turned out. And that is how I plan to start quilting all of my blocks, selecting designs, using that echo ditching. I just think that's absolutely perfect. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot from this tutorial on using Quilter's Creative Touch 4. If you'd like to learn more about this software and upgrading your frame and long arm so that it runs on its own, come and check it out at leahday.com/QCT. Until next time, let's go quilt.